This happened to me when I was a kid. I was a dreamer, the quiet girl no one really noticed. I was incredibly shy and liked to keep myself in the background. When I was in elementary school, we were doing a class project called Woods Explorer, which was basically a long hike through the woods. We took a bus to an area with walking trails and a forest. There were about 18 of us, as I recall, 3 adults and 15 children. We stayed together in a large group, wandering the trails while the teachers pointed out different trees, plants, and wildlife. I enjoyed the walk through the woods. I stayed with the crowd as we crunched over the leafy trail, but wasn't really paying attention to what anyone was saying. As we moved forward, I gradually began to feel like I was being watched, not by anyone in the group, but by someone or something out there in the woods. I scanned the trees but saw nothing out of the ordinary. It was windy, and at some point I became aware that there were voices on the wind, singing voices. I know it sounds weird, but that's what I recall. Then I began to feel really lightheaded. Not in a bad way, but more soothing, if that makes sense. I don't know how I ended up separated from the group. I have a gap in my memory here, but I suddenly realized that the crowd, the other kids, the teachers, were nowhere in sight. That's when I noticed another kid, a boy about my age up ahead. He was standing next to a tree and looking at me as if he was waiting for me. I hurried to catch up to him, thinking he would lead me to the rest of the group. But as I moved towards him, he moved away from me. It was the strangest thing. It felt like the distance between us remained exactly the same, no matter what pace I was walking at. If I moved quickly, he moved quickly. If I slowed down, so did he. It was like there was an invisible force between us that kept us apart. Like if you point two magnets at each other with the same poles and they repel each other instead of attract. I have another gap in my memory here, a feeling of being in a kind of trance. I snapped out of it when I heard my name being called with a panicked intensity. I realized I was standing in the middle of nowhere, in a depression or natural hollow in the woods where the earth dipped downwards, surrounded by trees with no trace of a path nearby. I didn't immediately reply to what I now realized were multiple voices shouting my name. I was confused and dizzy. Then one of the other kids became visible at the top of the hollow and saw me and called loudly for the others. Kids and adults all crowded down into the hollow with me. Looking both worried and relieved, one of the teachers hugged me. She told me they had been looking everywhere for me and that I shouldn't have run off like that. After that, she took me by the hand and stayed close by me for the rest of the outing. Later on, I found out that I had been missing for hours. But to me, it felt like I was just away for maybe a few minutes. I can't say for sure that the boy I followed through the woods was one of the Fae, but I strongly believe he was. I still visit that forest to this day whenever I visit my family. I've since moved to another city, but I still feel drawn there somehow. I've never been able to find the exact spot where I split from the others, or the hollow where I ended up. But these days, I don't stray too far from the path. I don't trust my sense of direction enough for that. I did tell my family about the experience, but they said I was a dreamer when I was a kid, living in my own world, and that I'd probably just imagine the whole thing. But I'm sure that that wasn't the case. I think maybe those of us who are dreamers are living in our own little worlds. Maybe we're tapping into or being drawn into other worlds that really exist. And maybe Sometimes we slip a little too far into those worlds, like I did on that day in the woods. This happened when I was 14 or 15, maybe. It was right around the time I started practicing witchcraft and Wicca, so I think my perceptions were unusually high because I was so interested and also so young and excited. I believed in fairies back then, still do. It's a belief I've had since I was a kid. I never grew out of it like other kids seem to. Essentially, what happened was I went to the park near my house one day with my brothers to walk our dog. It was around dusk when the incident happened, maybe 7:30, 8 p.m. My brothers played with the dog while I sat on one of the swings. I remember singing a song that I made up on the spot. The song went something like, "One fairy, two fairy, three fairy, four. Come out, the fairy door." I'd been singing this for a few minutes when I noticed the sky getting darker and sort of ominous. There was a slide next to me. I glanced at it and saw a white light emanating from a small crevice on one side of the slide. It was unmistakable. A small white light. Then my body froze, and suddenly everything felt muffled. I stared at the light. I couldn't take my eyes off it. It was like I was hypnotized, like all of my other senses had turned off. Nothing else existed, nothing else mattered, just me and that light. It was like it was calling me. Then I snapped back to reality. I heard my brothers yelling at me to hurry up. It was dark and they wanted to go home. The light was gone now. It just disappeared. And I could move again. I ran over to meet my brothers. Apparently, they had been calling me from across the park for some time, but I hadn't heard them. I didn't go back to that park for 2 weeks out of fear of what happened. Then I had a freaky dream that I think might be related. In the dream, I was walking down the path to that same park. There, a portal opened up to another world. In the dream, I wasn't afraid, I was curious. I entered the portal and found myself in a beautiful green valley with a bright blue flowing stream of water and so many gorgeous trees. The vibrancy and beauty of the place was ethereal and out of this world. I was captivated by it. There were mermaids in the water. Their fins sparkled in the sunlight. I ran to the waterside. I desperately had to talk to one of the mermaids, but I soon realized they didn't want to talk to me. This crushed me. I felt this deep ache like unrequited love and leaned against a tree and started crying. Then I woke up with this emotional ache in my chest, a feeling of deep longing. Years later, I was walking in that same park when I thought I saw, in the gap between two trees, what appeared to be green hills and a valley, similar to that magical place I had seen in my dream. This happened in a split second, and when I looked again, there was nothing there. I now believe that that park may be magical somehow, that there may be some sort of portal there to somewhere else. I think I was being lured there for some reason, but judging by the terrible heartache I felt in my dream, I don't think that reason was entirely good. I was about 11 to 12 years old on holiday in the Norfolk Broads with my mom, dad, two sisters, and a cousin. I'm the youngest of three sisters. My boy cousin was about 3 years younger than me. It was early afternoon on a clear, sunny, late summer's day. We'd moored our hired boat in a very quiet area next to fields and grasslands. There were no pubs or other tourists around. This was an unusual holiday for our family. We'd never hired a boat before or been anywhere so cut off from the world. I wandered off alone to explore the expanse of flat, open fields, which were crisscrossed with hedgerows. I came to an opening in one of the hedgerows by an old country stile and heard the most beautiful music. It seemed to come and go on the breeze. I remember it as a circular tune, plaintive yet joyful. It could have been a flute or a pipe, no accompaniment, just beautiful, sweet music that faded in and out on the air. It actually brought tears to my eyes. I remember moving my head about, desperate to catch it again on the breeze. If it faded away, I wanted to find the source of it, to follow it. I thought about climbing through the opening in the hedgerow and following the music wherever it might lead, but hesitated, worrying that I might get lost if I went by myself. So I ran back to the boat to find my sisters and cousins, to get them to come with me. I led them excitedly back to the stile, but when we got there, and I told them to stand quietly and listen for the music, they didn't hear anything, and very quickly started mucking about. My young boy cousin was bored within 2 minutes and started a silly game with my middle sister of pushing each other, which led to raucous laughter and raised voices. And my older sister shrugged and said it probably was someone playing music that I overheard. But it couldn't have been. There was no one moored there but us. And our family back at the boat certainly wasn't playing music. They weren't the types to be interested in weird folk music anyway. As we headed back to the boat, I felt like crying. I now had a profound sense that the music had been meant just for me. I was a deep-thinking, introverted child, and that by inviting others, I had lost my chance to follow it wherever it wanted me to go. By trying to share something magic, I had lost it. I went back to the hedgerow later alone, just before it got dark, but I never heard the music again. I do believe that whatever I heard was of this world, just removed from the normal, like a veil was allowed to lift for a moment or two. I wasn't frightened or in awe. It didn't feel like a holy experience. I just yearned to hear the music and be closer to whatever was producing it, which, looking back, I believe was its intention. I will never forget this experience. Although it was over 35 years ago, it's still a vivid memory for me. I often wonder what might have happened if I had followed the music between the hedgerows instead of running for my sisters and cousins. Would I have been led to an even more magical experience? Or would I simply have been led astray? I wonder. I wish I could hear that music again. More than anything. One evening after dinner, I decided to go out for a walk. It turned into a long walk. It was a beautiful, peaceful evening, and I needed the fresh air and exercise. On my walk, I happened upon a small metal bell lying on the sidewalk and decided on a whim to pick it up and keep it as an oddment. Not long after this discovery, I decided to start for home. There's an old library not too far from where I live that backs onto a woodland. In the past, I had occasionally cut through that woodland when I was in a hurry, though I normally took the long way around. By the time I neared the library that night, I had been out walking so long my feet were starting to ache. I decided to take the shortcut. It was a moonless night and unusually dark, but I had taken the path through the woods often enough that I didn't think twice about it. I made my way through the woods at a brisk pace, hands in my pockets. But the further I moved into the dark forest, the further I got from the reassuring lights of the library, the more uneasy I became. It was the darkness. It seemed to creep up on me, and it got darker and darker with every step I took until it was pitch black and impossible to see. By this time, I was alarmed. I had walked this path many times. The houses with lights that surrounded the woodland could not have been more than 100 yards away, and yet I couldn't see any of them. I turned around, and there was no sign of the library or its lights between the trees. This was when I heard the sound of small, indistinct voices talking, whispering, and laughing from the trees all around me. I could see nothing, but caught glimpses of dark shadows moving in the branches. The shadows were small, humanoid-shaped and quick, darting here and there among the branches. As they moved, they laughed and whispered between themselves, their voices high-pitched. I froze in place, my hands still in my pockets. At the same time, my fingers brushed up against the metal bell I had picked up. Out of pure instinct, I pulled out the bell, tinkled it for a few moments, and said aloud, "Here, you can have this." And then I hooked the bell on the nearest branch I could reach in the darkness. The whole mood seemed to shift after this. The woods were a little less dark, and the path, though not visible, was suddenly discernible underfoot as a flat, clear space to walk. I knew which way to go now and quickly found myself out of the woods and back on the sidewalk. From there, I made my way straight home without looking back. The next day, under the full light of the afternoon sun, I decided to venture back into the woods to look for the bell, but it was nowhere in sight. I don't know what I encountered that night or what might have happened to me if I hadn't had that bell and thought to offer it to whatever was out there. But I will say that the woods in question always seemed to be, although very sparse and in the middle of an urban environment, quite old. I think whatever lives there might be older still. This happened a few years ago during my first year at university. I was having a hard time. I had been excited to go initially, but the reality of university just wasn't what I thought it would be. I thought my classes would be inspiring, exciting, and challenging. Instead, they were negative, depressing, and dull. I felt like I wasn't learning anything, at least not anything useful. And I started to wonder why I was even there. What kind of job can you get with a humanities degree anyway? I felt lost, directionless. To make matters worse, I was having trouble connecting with any of the other students in a real way. I found some of them to be judgmental and kind of mean. This wasn't the majority, but there were students like this in almost every class. Loud and obnoxious, they dominated all the class discussions, and I felt too intimidated by them to participate, ask questions, or voice any objections. So I stayed silent. After putting up with this for almost an entire year, I had a day where I just couldn't take it anymore. I needed to be alone with my thoughts, so I skipped my class and went on a walk around the campus. It was an incredibly foggy day. I don't know if I've ever experienced a day this foggy. I could only see a few yards in any direction. Beyond that, there was only this thick, milky whiteness. But I was happy about the fog actually because I was crying and I didn't want other people to see. This turned out not to be an issue. I didn't see anyone at all on my walk across the grounds, which was strange because it was usually busy with people heading to or from class or else lounging on the lawn. But I figured the fog and the wet, mucky ground was keeping people inside. Besides, I was too distracted by my emotions to pay attention to much else. Soon, it started to dawn on me that I hadn't passed any of the normal landmarks I should have passed, like sidewalks or benches or streetlights or buildings. Instead, it was like I was walking on an endless field of trimmed grass. I stopped and looked around, but all I could see was grass and fog. I didn't know where I was or what direction led back to the university. I decided to double back, assuming that if I retraced my steps, I would eventually find my way back to the main building. I walked for a long time, but still I wasn't passing any people, landmarks, or buildings, and the fog seemed only to get thicker. Eventually, I saw a light up ahead, which looked like it was coming from some sort of building, so I headed for it. But instead of being led to a building, I was led to a wild, wooded area. There were patches of woods on the outskirts of the campus, but if I had reached one of those, it meant I had been walking away from the university instead of towards it, as I thought. And I still couldn't figure out where the light I'd been following was coming from. I could see it, shining between the trees, but it seemed disconnected from any structures, like a lantern maybe, hanging from a tree branch. Then, just for a second, I could have sworn I saw someone peeking out from behind one of the trees. This person was short, like maybe the height of a 10-year-old child, and had dark hair and a mischievous grin. It could have been a trick of the fog and the trees and my imagination, but I really believe there was someone there. More than that, I felt something, a presence. I called out, "Hello, is someone there?" But there was no reply. I was totally freaked out at this point. I turned around and headed quickly away from the woods. Away from the woods had to be towards the university, right? But this time, as I moved, the fog started to clear. I could now see streetlights, sidewalks, and benches. And then there was the main building. The whole thing was bizarre. I couldn't understand how I'd been so lost before when everything had been right there. I don't know if it was a fairy I saw out there in the woods, or if the fog or that light had something to do with it, but I do feel very lucky to have had the experience, even though it was a bit frightening at the time. This experience, among other things, also led me to make a final decision about university. I decided to switch to a community college, and I'm now training to become an arborist, which is the coolest job in the world. It's someone who specializes in the care of trees. I didn't even know there was such a job, but once I discovered it, I knew it's what I wanted to do, and I'm a lot happier now. It's a bit strange that I had what I can only describe as a fairy experience and then decided to dedicate my life to trees, particularly since fairies are nature spirits as I understand it. It's almost like I met some kind of fairy job recruiter. Well, maybe I did. Maybe, in a way. I work for them now. Thanks for watching. I have a website up and running at scaryfairygodmother.com, link in the description. It has a spot where you can submit your fairy stories or comments, questions, or suggestions. You can also sign up for my mailing list there. I'll send out some occasional sneak peeks and that sort of thing. I also plan to add more to the website in the future, so I'll send out updates about the website on the mailing list. So please sign up and look forward to eventual mail from me, even though I haven't sent out anything yet, but it will happen. um, I want to send my special thanks, as always, to all my supporters on Patreon who are helping to support this content and helping me to do things like build websites and hopefully expand and make more content in the future. I really appreciate you guys so much and the support you are giving this work. If you like this content and would like to support it, please check out my Patreon page. The link is in the description. You can also join the channel by pressing the join button below this video. The stories in this video came courtesy of subscribers and the Fairy Census, so thanks to everyone who submitted. The stories were edited for dramatic and narration reasons. If you would like to read the original Census Stories, the link to the census is in the description, and that comes from the Fairy Investigation Society, so special thanks as always goes out to them. If you have had a fairy experience and would like to share it, please email it to me or submit it on the form on the website. Please leave a comment below. Tell me what you thought of these stories. Like, share, and subscribe if you're new, and hit the bell to receive notifications of new videos. And until next time, this has been a visit from your scary fairy godmother.